Okay, thank you everyone, and welcome to my conversation with Tomomi Sasaki on learning as a social activity. This is the fifth of 7 conversations that I'm hosting to celebrate the 7th anniversary of Freedom, my branding and marketing consultancy. So thank you for joining us and for celebrating with me. And I'm excited to have you here just to kind of help us get in the right mindset. I'm going to ask you a prompt, and since we only have 2 people, you can either kind of answer out loud or you can answer in the chat. And the prompt is, I am interested in this topic because. So Hannah says it's really fun and inspiring. I would agree. And Mel says the same thing. So great. Well, let's dive in. So instead of doing kind of a traditional introduction about Tomomi, I wanted to share the 3 things that I think are most interesting about her. We met over the pandemic in a Slack community called REOPS, Research and Operations. And Tomomi is a designer by trade and education, but I think of her practice as really about design in the broadest sense. So it's not just, designing a graphic, but it's really designing interactions between people, which I find really interesting and exciting and provocative. She is incredibly open and generous. She introduces me to new ways of thinking about facilitation and workshops, and ways of thinking about those sorts of experiences that are more open and participatory and inclusive. So I'm constantly learning and being inspired by her. And finally, Tomomi has this amazing e-newsletter called Postcards from Tomomi, which is just these beautiful reflections of trips she's taking and bike rides she's taking, and even work that you're doing, Tomomi, that transport me to places away from where I am in Washington, D.C., to Japan and Croatia and Italy and France. And her writing is so evocative that I kind of can feel the wind on me as she's riding her bike. And during the pandemic, when I've was definitely not traveling, and even still as I'm traveling a little bit, it's just wonderful to see and hear about these places and her experiences in them. So thank you for joining me, Tomomi.
Oh, it's my pleasure and really my honor. And congratulations again on 7th anniversary. It's quite a milestone, and so cool that you're doing this.
Thank you. So for the first question, I wanted to say or ask really about our views of learning. So on the one hand, everyone knows it's important to both our personal development and our professional growth. We always need to kind of learn new things, new ways of doing things. But often it's thought of as a solo activity, right? So at work, you've got your professional development budget that's for you as an individual. And it really ignores the impact that social interaction has on learning, that it's not just about kind of us in some pod with knowledge being pumped into our brains. So why is learning always social and participatory from your perspective? And can you kind of share an example of that from your practice?
Yes, absolutely. And I want to put it in the context of the type of work that I think we do, which is kind of typically called knowledge work, right? And our work is really about the quality of ideas that we have, that we can share, the energy and the conversations that we have with other people, the clarity in the signals that we put out. And all of this happens with other people, whether they are right in front of you or not. Like, none of it happens in a vacuum. And so I think, as you say, learning is so critical. And so it's very natural to me that learning itself should then also be social and participatory and not a separate activity from the doing or the execution. And when it's weaved in together is really when it's most creative and like it's most fun. And I think sustains us to keep doing the work that we do and also enjoy what we do as individuals. Um, so one practice that I try to do is like just actively take part in other people's learning journeys. Um, and I think like what we're doing here is a little bit of that, right? Like I gave a talk about learning as a social activity. Leigh, you came to the talk, you happened to see it, and now you're kind of taking it in your own context and then inviting me, but also four other people along now. And so like all of the curiosities that we have then start to blend together. And so this is, just a small example. But looking at people in my environment and seeing what people are curious about, not because it's a skill that they need for their work, but just because it's exciting to them. And a lot of times there are opportunities to kind of take part in their journey. And I think the more we have that kind of interaction with people, in our professional environment, the kind of more natural it becomes for momentum to come, so that learning is flowing all the time.
You brought up a great point, this sort of dichotomy between learning and doing, as though they're kind of two separate fields. Like you've got to wait to do until you learn, and that they're kind of kept separate. And I know in another talk you talked about the important tension between I think you used the words exploration and exploitation mode. So the acquiring new learnings versus applying the knowledge or skills that you have. And what can happen if they become unbalanced. So if you're focused too much on learning and not enough on applying it, or focus solely on applying it and never learning anything new. How can learning as a social activity help us hold a healthy tension between those two modes?
Yeah, so I think of these two modes, and of course they're not black and white. We kind of go in between them. It's fractal, right? So I can be in exploration or exploitation mode. Maybe the team is in one of the modes, and maybe as an organization, it's in another mode. And the balance is very important, because if we're too much always in exploring mode, maybe we're not delivering the work that we're supposed to do, we're not meeting our deadlines, we're not creating. But if we're too much in exploitation, which is the expression of whatever we have acquired, knowledge and skill that we have acquired, I have this mental image that we just become very skinny, like there's no fat in what we do. And yeah, like I think everyone here is working in some kind of creative field, and we know it's dangerous to be in that like skinny, scarce space where it's really hard to come up with new ideas. You don't feel excited, and like that has a direct impact on the work. And so I think that balance is important to us as professionals. And then where the social aspect of learning can come in is maybe I happen to be in a spot where I just kind of really need to be 6 months on this delivery project and I cannot fail. And so I have kind of stamped out a lot of the risks that I would have liked to take, so that I can make sure to deliver, right? Like sometimes we have to be in this kind of mode and and we accomplish something and that's great. But I don't want to just be in that kind of delivery mode. So I will try to place somebody or ask a colleague to be more in an exploratory mode, and maybe it's specific to a topic that's relevant to the project, or just somebody in my environment, if they can be in another mode and it's about a topic that I'm curious about, that gives me these little outlets, these little windows into what they're learning, so that I can come up for a breath, And then also have opportunities to, yeah, just get out of the head of whatever project that I'm doing and benefit from the exploration that someone else is doing. And I think that can work both ways. Those partnerships are really important. We don't always want to be on like the receiving end of that from a specific person, but because everyone around us is learning different things at different times, I think we can be like, there are ways to be strategic, so that we're benefiting and incorporating that in the balance that we try to keep.
I love too how you kind of talked about it in terms almost like a community, right? You're not, even though you may be working on this deadline for 6 months and really focused, you don't exist in a vacuum, that there are other people around you that you can kind of tap into and get re-energized through what they may be learning or they may be working on, that can kind of help sustain you over that time when you really need to be focused. And I think that's really important.
Exactly.
And I know you do a lot of facilitation work in your practice,
Mm-hmm.
and are very interested in facilitation. And I think facilitation is really changing. I mean, I think there are different kind of modes where, even though the word itself suggests some kind of interaction, in many ways, the kind of old school notion of facilitation is like a person at the head of the class, so to speak, kind of just telling you what to do and really controlling the experience. And I know you take a much more kind of open and collaborative approach. So could you talk more about your facilitation practice and the the kind of role it plays in learning a social practice?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, and it's funny you mentioned kind of this more conventional way of facilitation, because when I started out, that's what I thought it was supposed to look like, and that's what I tried to do. And it's not in my nature to be like this. And so it was exhausting, first of all. Yeah, like I had to become someone else to do this kind of facilitation, and I could do it, but it wasn't sitting right. And so over the years, and as I've been exposed to more like a broader range of styles in facilitation, and be like, oh, you can do it this way, or oh, I really liked how that person brought out this part of their personality to do that. It's allowed me to let go of what I think it should look like, and tap into what it could look like. And as the stakes of the conversations that I'm facilitating grow higher, I find that the coherence, like of my presence, right, like how I'm behaving, how I'm acting, how I'm projecting, like that really needs to align with who I am. People can tell, right, when the facilitator or whoever is uncomfortable, and that discomfort, if it's ignored or like tamped down or like manipulated in some way, yeah, like people start to detach, the trust starts to bleed out from the
Mm.
room. So it's like, yes, I am not able to be this kind of facilitator, but also it is actually important that I find my own, like develop my own style. So that's very important in my facilitation practice. And then bringing it back to learning, yeah, it's really what you said about community. I think that being a facilitator, or even if you don't identify as one, occasionally taking on the role of facilitation or even like appreciating good facilitation helps us understand how to be in community, how to
Mm.
invite people into a space and then hold that space for the conversation that we would all like to have. Now, that's a little bit abstract, but I think that transfers very well to learning. And so it's not so much the like technical skills of facilitation that's useful, although of course if you're doing workshops or book clubs and such, of this kind of hosting skill is very important. The idea of being in community so that the learning is emerging from the people that are there, I think lends itself, well, the skills of facilitation lends itself very well to learning as a group.
Well, and I think in sort of preparing for this conversation, I was thinking about kind of two things and how they come together. So one is throughout our work interactions, all of these group experiences we have, right? Everyone's in meetings a lot. So it's not necessarily an official kind of workshop, but there are lots of meetings that bring together people where you're having to make decisions or come up with ideas. And then there's this idea of learning that seems to be kind of tucked away on the side as though it doesn't have any place in those kinds of daily interactions that we have with colleagues at work. And so when I think about facilitation and learning, I started thinking about, well, how can we reimagine these meetings that we have in a work context to make them more collaborative and learning opportunities. So even things like, the things that we all dread, I think, because they're done so poorly, like status meetings or brainstorming sessions, or even client presentations, which tend to be viewed as this kind of one-way mode of communication. How do you think that? Yeah, exactly, like a performance. How do you think that people could bring in facilitation or reimagine those sorts of meetings or presentations in a way that is more collaborative and facilitates learning a little more? Because I think, like, even if you're presenting to a client, it's not just about you sharing your perspective, it's really educating them and teaching them about kind of how to make sense of what you've learned, what to do next, all of those things, all of these types of group experiences are also learning opportunities.
Yeah, I think one thing we often forget or don't explicitly address in these contexts is the role of human emotion. We focus on the content, we focus on the style, but what about like our human selves that are taking part in this experience? So tapping into things like curiosity, instead of asking, what questions do you have? If we asked, what are you curious about? Like that, the person will speak from a different part of themselves, I think. And, there's questions around the content, but there's also just like you as a person have a perspective on what's going on. Like, what is that? I want to know. What is surprising? What is scary? What makes you mad? I think trying to draw that out to the surface, and have that be part of how we're engaging with whatever we're supposed to be talking about, is one way to like amplify the learning that can be happening, and helps us go from the more dry business-like exchange or performance to like, why are we really here? Like, why are you here today? Yeah, and that can lead to breakthroughs of the thinking. It can lead to more trust. I think it's more interesting to engage with work and clients and colleagues that way, and kind of get us to a more profound and like essence of whatever we're trying to address.
Do you have any kind of examples of situations where you've used a more facilitation-like approach and the impact that that's had?
I mean, if I think of how we start projects, usually there's a kickoff, right? And somebody shares the objective. Here's everything. Like, here's the timeline. Here are the risks. Like, here's what you're supposed to do. And, and like that doesn't really touch me. And maybe I don't. Maybe I'm not, like, maybe I'm excited about the project, of course, but like, what's a way to make me like stand up, right, and engage? And so I think, yeah, the kickoff is a like a critical moment in which we can start to set the tone for that, and asking questions like, what are you curious about, or like, what do you dream of happening as we work together, or like, what part of um, yeah, what would you like to see happen? Like, how would you like to connect? What part of yourself are you
Mm,
bringing? The questions can be asked in different ways.
right.
But I think having people verbalize that in the context of like a work meeting, um, with whatever comfort level that the group is able to stand, and then once we
Mm,
do that with a specific group, um, next time we do it, we can go a little bit deeper. Maybe this time
mm,
we can talk about fear, like what tends to upset you, like what are you afraid of as we go into this
mhm,
process. Um, so there's like facilitation capability that is called for to do this kind of thing, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
You need to be able to assess what the room can handle, like who we are
Mm,
as we bring about these topics, and be able to like bring it together somehow and like feed it into the project. Like this is facilitation work. Um, and I think when leaders can do this and model it for their teams, like this is very powerful. It means the
mm,
team can connect with each other on a different way. And I think that kind of environment is much more like conducive to learning. And so that's kind
yeah.
of how that all fits together for me.
Yeah, I think there are several things in what you said that really resonated for me, which is, to kind of instead of thinking of yourself as a performer, where you're even in a kickoff meeting, right, where you're
Hmm.
the authority and you're kind of setting the ground rules. It's really about coming into a space with curiosity for everyone and really starting to build relationships around what people's emotions are around this work, because you're right, we all bring emotions to the work that we do. And so to be able to create a space where people can share those things, um, brings you all closer and creates a feeling that you all have stake in what's happening.
Mm.
It's not this transaction where you've paid me, so I'm going to deliver this thing. It's more that we are a group of people working toward a common goal, and how can we do this as effectively as possible together.
I think
So I
there's
think that's really
stake
powerful.
in each other as well.
Yeah. Yes, yes, yeah, yeah,
Right, because
exactly.
now I know something personal about you, and vice
Mhm.
versa. Because we're social creatures, it means we're gonna
Right.
take care of each other more.
Yes. Yeah,
And in the
exactly.
type of work that we do, I think that kind of bond and trust and ability to talk to each other like has a direct impact on the work.
Oh, yes,
Mm.
definitely. Yeah. No, that's extremely, extremely important. You also, when you were talking about facilitation, you mentioned kind of that traditional way of facilitating where kind of you're more dictating the interactions. I think you said, well, what just wasn't in my nature, and it like
Hmm.
took a lot out of me and it made me exhausted. And I think it's really important to recognize those cues that you get from your body, kind of saying, this is
Yes.
not, I should not be doing this.
Yeah.
Um, and not to try to fit yourself into a way of working that might work for someone else, but to kind of find your own way. And I think with facilitation, especially the way you were describing it as, these it's a knowledge skill, but it's a different kind of knowledge. It's really dealing with like picking up cues, being able to kind of focus conversations, um, make sure that people feel included. So, how did you, where did you land in terms of your facilitation style? And
Hmm.
what does that look like?
I don't know if I've landed anywhere, and that's the beauty
Oh,
of approaching it as a practice, right? which is not something I did in the beginning. I thought it was a type of meeting that I needed to learn how to run because it
Mm,
was good for the project. Um, but once I started, and I'm not facilitator is not my like primary identity, right? It's like under the umbrella of design, so it's a skill that I developed, but it wasn't like, oh, I want to become a facilitator. But when
right.
I started to think of it as a practice and that I have a practice, it's not just an activity that's done in the project, but this is something like I carry into whatever I do. That started like that allowed me to be more um, kind of creative with what I wanted to
Mm,
experiment. And maybe this is, the link to learning. This is very, very meta now. Um, but then the way that I learned how to facilitate would change because I saw it as a practice. I would seek different inspirations. Like I would go and attend things just because I was curious to see how they would facilitate. We'll look at different tools to see what's out there. And yeah, that is just ongoing. Um, and there does not need to be an end. There's a style that I have now
mm,
that, I'm comfortable with. Like there's a zone of comfort, right, in the way that I facilitate. And
right,
sometimes, and I'm quite okay there. Like that's kind of in that exploit mode. I can switch it on, do the thing,
right.
not be exhausted at the end of the day or too
Gotcha.
exhausted anyway. But then
Yeah.
sometimes it's important to try facilitation that I'm uncomfortable with. Um, to give an example, there's a liberating structure in development called grief walking, and um, so yeah, liberating structures is this set of facilitation activities, as you know, Leigh. And yeah, so this is not one of the in the 33 set. This is in development. But the activity is to help people sit with their grief and then help them process it. That requires a level of like lived experience, right? That maybe I would not have tried to do when I was 20 something. And now I'm 30
Mm,
something. I'm a little bit more, but still, it's very intimidating to think
mm,
of calling in somebody's personal, like deep grief into the room and knowing that I have the responsibility to like hold that space and not
mm,
shy away from it, right? Or like try to make it better. So like I would not do this for a client project. But if I think of my facilitation practice, like it is something I will probably try one day. And like that's kind of
mm,
how I keep stretching my
mm,
skills around facilitation.
mm. So yeah, you brought up liberating structures, which is kind of a set of facilitation exercises or modules. I always have a difficult time, describing it,
Hard to
but
define, yes.
it's one reason I really like it is because it is designed. Each one is designed in such a way that it's kind of radically inclusive. So it doesn't matter if you're the CEO or if you're an intern, that everyone can participate um, and lend their voice. And can you kind of talk a little bit more about liberating structures and how it works as a facilitation um, practice and kind of why and how you gravitated towards that versus maybe other models.
Hmm. Yes, and I would love for you to do the same because
Okay.
I know that you've had your own inspirations from it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it is hard to explain what it is. You can call it a set of, workshop activities, um, but everything is, you take the name, like they are structures that liberate. And
Mm,
so the power of the facilitation is not in the facilitator, the person, it is in the structure, the activity, the way it's been designed so that participants are, well, first of all, they're participating and not receiving, and then they're connecting with each other and have the space to think and talk and listen to each other. And that is like baked into the way the activities are designed along a set of principles. And then there are 33 of these structures. And the liberation comes from by going through these structures, and you can do one or you can do a sequence of them. It's up to the facilitator to design what's called a string. Is that as we go through them, whatever creativity, like the potential that we have to address whatever we're gathered for, like will be unleashed, like will be liberated, not because someone told them the answer, but because the answer that and the resources that were available in the room were unleashed thanks to the way the activities have been designed. So like this is very, very different from this more dictatorship style or like, oh, fill in this canvas, right? Which is a method we often use as well, or even design thinking methods. And so, yeah, it was amazing for me when I discovered this. Well, first of all, also they are much more friendly, I think, on the facilitator, right? Because it's not about you anymore.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
that's definitely one reason I like it. Like you trust the process, and the job is to make sure the process is understood so that people can do it, and then you can kind of let go.
Yeah.
Yeah, say something about your own journey
Yeah.
as well, please.
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's very similar to what you described in that I was looking for more collaborative and participatory approaches to just group meetings, really, not even just facilitations, but anything that was just more collaborative. And I think I felt that liberating structures, it was really more about leveraging the knowledge that the group has. It's not so much about an authority coming in and kind of lecturing and then you filling out, uh, you or trying to apply what you've learned in some way through some exercise. It's really about the group has a challenge or a problem or is stuck, or it's an issue that arises from the group, which is why the facilitator is brought in. And then the facilitator isn't there to tell you what to do or to solve the problem for you, but they are there to create experiences that help you work together, leverage your own knowledge and feelings and experiences to come up with new understandings or insights that can help you address whatever the issue is. And so I found that it was very empowering for participants because it didn't talk down to them. It recognized that their own knowledge and experiences have value. And that just really jived with the way I approach my own branding and marketing work with clients. Because I always say to them, like, this brand is not about me. I'm going to be gone. And then you're left with whatever we've worked on. So this has to come from you. I'm just helping you kind of pull it together. So that was really and I felt it was just a much more accessible and inclusive way to have group interactions than kind of the traditional methods. And so that's what's kind of attracted me. And then also the greater community around liberating structures of people who do liberating structures has been so welcoming and generous. It's just, it just makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside. So I just love the generosity of the overall community as well. Yes. So that was sort of my journey. To kind of switch from the very specific learning, liberating structures kind of format or approach to facilitation, to think more broadly about learning. And I think it's something that we often kind of think about in the abstract as something that we know we need to do, but it happens haphazardly. Like I just randomly cross an article or randomly come across an event that looks interesting. Do you think there's a way to be more conscious and intentional around learning, and finding opportunities for learning?
Yes. And this is related, I think, to just how busy we are, right? And how learning may get deprioritized because we just don't get around to
Right.
it. That's just kind of the reality of this modern world. And so I think, well, I tend to think learning is happening anyway. And it's more a matter of improving the quality of learning that we're doing and our own enjoyment of the experience. And as you said, in terms of intentionality, kind of align what we're learning to what is valuable for where we are, in our career or whatever, and also for our future, the future selves that we want to be. And I think that's where the intentionality can come in. So with that in mind, I think kind of setting up small mechanisms, like little systems around us, like a web of things, so that it's not something that we have to be like, right, now I need to go and learn, because that takes so much energy. Or like, all right, now this is the 30 minutes where I go and check Twitter and see what people are saying. Like sometimes this comes up as a strategy and I'm like, yeah, you're not gonna do that. Like I'm gonna read one book a week. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, some people can do that, but I know I can't.
Yeah. I'm with you.
I need that already to be in place, so that as I go throughout my day, the quality of input and like the right things are coming in my direction, and also that the people that I'm interacting are all like also in the mindset of like, what am I learning? What are we learning together? And so I think just starting with that mindset is already helpful in terms of feeling like we're not prioritizing learning enough. It's like taking what we're already doing and maybe making some tweaks so that it doesn't take so much of an effort is one thing. The other is to think of the seasonality of what we're learning. We are curious about lots of things. We want to learn, like if we make a list, it'll be very long. And I think it's much smarter to take a couple of things that make sense now, and maybe there's some synergy between them, or like whatever project I'm doing at the moment, or the conference that I'm going to next month. Be very opportunistic about what is it I want to focus on now, and then like be totally okay that some of them are not going to, like, it's not the season for this topic anymore, and then it's time for another one to come in. And I think having that, yeah, recognizing that the most we can probably handle and maybe the most we want is just a couple at a time, and they will go through their own phases. Maybe first we just want to build a general understanding of the field, and then we want to identify specific skill that we want to pick up, and that does not need to happen at the same time. Maybe this month I'm focusing on this, and then I let it go for a while, and then next month I focus on another thing. Maybe I lose interest, and that's okay too. But recognizing that flow, I think, is really helpful in setting that intention, which then in turn like helps us be a little bit smarter about planning and prioritizing.
Yeah, I love that kind of metaphor of seasonality, because I find it's helpful in so many ways, because I think oftentimes as knowledge workers, we're so caught up in this kind of productivity cycle, which isn't a cycle because it's just on all the time. So cycle is kind of a misnomer, but and that, it's all about output, we've got to do X number of things or read X number of books or X number of articles or whatever it might be, in this notion that no, there's kind of a season to things. And if we lose interest, that's as valid as, being curious. Given that, you mentioned that you weren't the kind of person to like use these kind of abstract structures to impose on you, like I've got to read one book a week, or whatever it is. Do you find your learning is more guided by kind of like what your interests in the moment are? Do you do less of saying I've got to consume X number of pieces of content, and it's more about I want to learn about X, and whatever it takes to do that, then that's what I'll focus on? How do you approach it?
I think we have meta skills for how we learn. And for me, if it's in the professional context, what works really well for me, for example, if it's a new domain, is to check out all the conferences that are happening, look at all of the speakers, what are they talking about, who's sponsoring, what are the top blogs, like I have my ways of identifying where to go for the quality information. If this is more like a trend, find out what's
Right.
going on now. I think we have these techniques. And then if it's more of a foundational body of work that we're trying to learn, go on Goodreads and identify what are the books I should be reading. And maybe I'm not going to actually read them. I'll just read the Goodreads reviews or the Amazon reviews,
Right.
or I'll watch the 1 hour YouTube video that the author gave a talk on.
Right.
Like
Right.
we have all of these ways of jumping into topics, and I think having like that toolkit in a way is really empowering. And the more robust that is, and the more in tune it is with how we, like the individual, learns, the easier it is to kind of pick up new things,
Right.
and like meet people who are in that field.
Right. Um, Another way to approach learning as a social activity is to develop a community of practice. And can you kind of explain what that is, how it works, and then also how to generate interest and participation in a community of practice when we're all, busy with work stuff and life stuff, and so you're competing for people's time and energy?
Yes. Yeah, and it's fitting because we met in a community of practice, right? That we are no
Yeah,
longer
that's a good point.
so active in. But that's like a great example of what a community can offer. So basically, it's a group of people, usually without a very strong boundary. So it's not like here's 100 people at this community. It's like, no, that's just the number of people on the Slack. The actual community is much more blob like, and it
Right.
gets bigger and shrinks like depending on what people have going on and how much energy there is. But people are there because there is a common topic, something that everyone wants to learn more about, and to develop the way that they carry out their own practice. So that might include activities like being able to ask questions and get advice to the community, carrying out specific projects that will further the practice, will further the field, and all of that learning and participation is available to the community. And this is how, like, I think our fields tend to evolve. People get together out like beyond the boundary of our organizations, to get together and share our knowledge and try to push it forward by practicing together. And yeah, how can we generate interest and engagement? So I have this theory that everyone likes the ideas of communities, but stop at the level of, oh, it's a great way to meet new people. Oh, I can meet like-minded people. And to me, this is not specific enough to prioritize against other things that I need to be doing. And so how can that kind of catchphrase be more specific and more contextual to where you are in your life, your professional life at that moment? And that an example is just like, maybe I'm new to this field and I want to understand the landscape, or I want to establish my legitimacy in this field. And so I'm looking for opportunities to do public speaking and like to have people listen to me. Like, if we can get to that level of specificity in why you are active in a community, then it becomes possible to prioritize. But I think we tend to not get to that level. We're like, oh yeah, there's a lot of good information there and you can meet cool people.
Right. That's a really, really great point. And I think too, the difference between those things between, hey, meet new people versus can I find a platform where I can practice skills is really about giving people a role in the community. So, how is it's not just about people, it's really about what value does it have to me personally? Both, obviously it's a community, I need to contribute. So can I show up in this community in such a way that it's going to value my contributions, which will benefit the community, but also benefits me? And I think that you're right. A lot of places don't kind of frame their communities in that way. It's more a description around the kinds of people that are there versus the value it provides or the kinds of activities will allow you to do or the skills it will allow you to develop. So I think that's a really that's a great takeaway for me to think about as I'm looking at communities, because it's not just about, are these the right people to meet, but does the community have the activities that will help me grow and learn and all of those things?
And I love the phrase that you just used, like how you show up. It could be the exact same 100 people, but depending on how they show up, the value of the community and why people are there will be totally different.
Right. Exactly. And I think too, if it's focused too much on a description of the people, then you just go there kind of when you want something. Oh, people are there, I have a question, versus a true participatory environment where there's more give and take. Well, the last question I want to ask you is really about, how can we foster a greater culture of collaboration in our workplaces? So if the kinds of things we've been talking about, around learning as a social practice, kind of facilitation as a more inclusive and accessible practice, how, what's one thing that people can do to really start to incorporate some of these ideas? I think, especially in the West, and in America specifically, where the emphasis is so much on individual contribution and individual achievement over collaboration, it can be really difficult. So is there kind of one thing that you would recommend that people can try to begin to cultivate a more kind of collaborative learning environment?
Yeah, it's so hard to do this, right? It's really hard. And actually, what I appreciate, you used the word generosity in the beginning when you introduced me. I don't think it's one that I would have used to qualify the way that I go about my activities, but it makes sense to me that this is probably why I have like the opportunities and rich learnings that I have access to. It is in being open and inviting and like asking. Not because I need something, but just because I think it's interesting. And also
Yeah.
also as a way of paying back. I am this way because, you know, the people who went ahead of me were generous, and I just was like, oh, this is how it works. So when it's my turn, like I will do the same. I think the design community is there's a strong element of this. Um, it was definitely in the way I was brought up in Japan as well. Like if you are a grade older, it is your responsibility to teach the next, and
Mm.
the and your responsibility as the junior then is to learn so that when you have a junior, then it's your turn, and like that kind of pay forward mentality, just because that's how we want to be in general, is one that I think is maybe we don't think about it as often as we should, or we don't like articulate that as often
Right.
as we should. But I don't think, oh, be generous is like very good advice. So yeah, I just want to put that in a bracket. I think so. One thing I've personally been trying more and more in my work, especially as like I'm on the consulting side of business, right? And so I will work on different domains every couple of months. A lot of times I won't even it'll be a new domain for me. And so I've developed this like phone a friend, but more like text a friend trick. Where when I start a new project or meet a new topic that I don't really know about, but I know somebody who works in that domain, and it's probably not a work friend, maybe it's someone I met at the gym, I'll just text them or like ask for half an hour and be like, this is what I'm doing. What do you see? And they can cut through so much faster than any desk research that I can do, right?
Interesting.
Yeah,
I
and
love that
so
idea.
the kind of the older I get and kind of, you know, the more people that I can reach out to because I have more relationships. Now I'm
Right.
like, oh, let me just text my friend. I think she was doing something similar, or oh, maybe they can introduce me to someone, and like just trying to stop doing everything myself and being more open about like, hey, I have a question. And they're usually, it doesn't take a lot for them to answer, you know, the very basic
Yeah.
question that I'm asking.
Right. Right.
And I
I
feel
love
like
that idea.
we can do that to each other, with each other, right?
Yeah, I love that idea, that phone a friend of, hey, am I crazy? What is, I have
Yeah,
this, yeah, what is this about?
exactly. Yeah, like you
Um,
see a client brief and you're like, but the answer is obvious. Why isn't the client doing this thing, like doing this solution? But it's kind of hard to ask the client, right? Like, oh, why don't
right.
you do that? So like text a friend to say, so here's my hypothesis. And they'll be like, yeah, no, you can't do that because of regulations. I was like,
Gotcha.
oh, okay. Or maybe it's yes, that's exactly right. And then I have the confidence to not tell the client, but at some point in the project, maybe there's a way to bring in
Yeah.
more of that idea.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that idea. Thank you. And thank you so much for this conversation. It was great, as always, to chat with you. And I just, this is a topic that is just top of mind for me. And so it's been great to dive into it with you. We have a few minutes. And so I wanted to, in the interest of fostering curiosity and being curious, I wanted
Mhm.
Hannah and Mel. I think Mel's the other person that's here. Just in
Mhm.
the chat, something that you're chewing on now after this conversation.
Mm.
What are you what what are you kind of curious about?
There's so much.
And you can just say it out loud if you want to.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of your favorite facilitation activities?
Mm.
And Hannah, if you'd like to phone a friend, I'm happy to chat with you about that.
Cool. Yeah, I'd love that. Yeah, I loved the part where you were talking about ways to take some of the pressure off the facilitator. I definitely feel that sometimes, especially when sometimes you're working with, you know, people on your team who are less vocal, and you really feel like, you know, sometimes you have this great support system who, like, you don't feel like you're the lone facilitator. Like, you have support and help.
Right.
And sometimes you feel like you're like, okay, well, for this 4 hours, it's just gonna be me. Like, that's a lot of talking. So I love that idea of how do you make it not about yourself? How do you take that pressure off you and just really make it about, like, I'm just here to make sure this group is communing and doing what they need to do.
Yeah.
So I love that.
Great.
Yeah, let me drop in the chat link to liberating structures, and also one that I think is maybe the easiest one to start with,
Cool.
called
Thank
One
you.
Two For All. Did that come too? I don't see it.
I don't see it.
Maybe, oh, there it is.
Oh, awesome. Oh, thank you.
And it looks like, Mel, you were shaking your head about taking the pressure off, and we can't hear you. Now we can't see you.
Oh,
and now you're gone.
Everyone's having technical difficulties.
Oh wait, now she's back.
Anything. Oh, look, I'm old. That's amazing.
Oh,
So weird.
Old.
I was supposed to be on. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay. So very much like Hannah just said, I basically feel like my entire job is facilitating a group of people constantly.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm supposed to be doing the work, and I'm just be the collaborative, like, cheerleader and coach. And there are meetings where I'm literally the only one talking, and they're just sort of like, I think they're taking it in, and I'm like, at the end, I'm like, okay, so is this helpful? I'm not quite sure what's going on. So I'm always looking for new tools in my arsenal to, like, other than just assigning tasks for them to report out on or to lead. I'm looking for more empowering tools. So I think that was a lot of helpful.
Also, Mel, you bring up a great point, which I don't think we thought about, which is, like, as a manager, how you're a facilitator and what that means, and how, you know, that could be its own conversation. And I know it's 11 o'clock, so I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Thank you again, Tomomi, for joining us. And thank you, Hannah and Mel, for sticking it out until the end. I have 2 more conversations coming up. I think it's December 3rd, is Fans on Fandom, which I'm super excited about because I'm talking about fans of Hayam, which I think Hannah and Mel both know are, like, I'm obsessed with. And my daughter Sally is even encouraging me to DM the band to see if they will join us. So who knows what could happen.
I love Hayam so much. So so exciting. That's great.
But seriously, I wanted to look at fandoms from a fan perspective as opposed to some, like, you know, social media reporter or something like that. So to really get to understand fandoms from the inside out. And then the last conversation is an Ask Me Anything with me. So would love to see y'all there too. So thank you so much again, Tomomi. Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tomomi. Thank you, Leigh.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.